So we've spent the last 9 days talking very intensely about food and the environment. But there's a lot of people that paid a lot of attention to the questions about food. We had world-class speakers talk to you about food and tell you why you should eat different things. And the underlying goal of all of it was to be conscious of your health and the planet. However, as much as it would be great if that was the only thing to think about, the food, there are things outside of food that impact us and the planet. So the point of this panel is to make everyone aware that for the same reasons that everyone is so conscious about eating carefully to avoid health challenges, there are non-food issues that also affect our health. And we've brought some people who are world-class experts in this to talk to you about this. So the first person I want to introduce you to is Dave Hunter, author of Mason Bee Revolution, How the Hardest Working Bee Can Save the World One Backyard at a Time. And for those of you that say, well, I don't really care that much about bees, there's an expression called the canary in the coal mine. And what it means is if a canary went into the coal mine and it died, well, that meant that it was exposed to something that the coal miners could be exposed to. And it was an early warning sign that there was something dangerous that the coal miners were breathing, because the canary with smaller lungs died, and eventually it would affect them. So the bees and what's happening to the bees and the other pollinators and other things in nature is a concern because it's going to affect us eventually. So Dave Hunter is the founder and owner of Crown Bees and has been working for a decade to learn, teach, and apply natural techniques on solitary native bees. What started out as a backyard hobby has turned into the world's largest solitary bee company devoted to making more food for the gardener and farmer. Dave founded the professional organization Orchard Bee Association and has advised for the USDA's Integrated Crop Pollination Project for the past 5 years. He firmly believes that teaming with science to ensure best practices are followed has us with health. I'm sorry, I'm going to read that again. He firmly believes that teaming with science to ensure best practices are followed has us with, I guess we wrote that wrong. Changing perceptions about how bee pollinate isn't easy. Many of our bee assumptions stem from the honeybees we know and love. Dave will help you unlearn most of them, which, true for honeybees, is not necessarily helpful for our food-making native bees of the world. Dave's stories will help you easily understand natural bee basics. So the next person is Beth Greer. Beth Greer is the author of the Supernatural, her book is called Supernatural Home, Improve Your Health, Home, and Planet One Room at a Time. Beth Greer, the Supernatural Mom, is one of the foremost experts on sustainable and toxin-free living. She is an award-winning journalist, recently named one of the top 50 health and environmental journalists to follow in 2016, and is the author of the best-selling book Supernatural Home, endorsed by Deepak Chopra and Ralph Nader. Beth experienced firsthand the powerful benefits of holistic, toxin-free living. She eliminated a sizable tumor in her chest without drugs or surgery by detoxing her body in her home, and she found powerful holistic approaches that helped her teenage daughter overcome ADHD and addiction to drugs and alcohol. As a consultant and speaker, Beth assists individuals and organizations in creating toxin-free holistic home and work environments and lifestyles that improve health, mood, and performance. She's the host of Kids in Crisis radio show, where she interviews leading medical experts and treatment professionals, and is the former president of the Learning Annex. A short list of clients includes Google, LinkedIn, NBC, NPR, Rodale Wellness, Martha Stewart Living, Health Magazine, Prevention Magazine, and CNN. Learn more at bethgreer.com. Beth Lambert is the author, educator, and former healthcare consultant. Beth Lambert has monitored and documented the escalating rates of childhood chronic conditions for nearly a decade. Her book, A Compromised Generation, provides a thorough analysis of the origins of this modern health crisis and documents how modifications to environmental and lifestyle factors can profoundly influence health outcomes, including full disease reversal. Beth is the founder and executive director of Epidemic Answers, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to reestablishing vibrant health in our children. She is also the creator and executive producer of the Documenting Hope Project, a multi-year prospective research study and media project that examines the cumulative impact of environmental stressors on health and their mitigation through personalized and systems-based treatment approaches. Beth is the mother of 3 children and is passionate about raising awareness about the connection between daily choices, human health, and planetary health. Just to make a comment on this, Beth spoke at our last conference, and when we pick speakers for our conference, we try to change it each year so that there's new speakers and new information. So originally, I said, well, Beth offered wonderful information, but I don't think it makes sense to include her because we just included her last time. And as we continued filling the roster of speakers, I was very disturbed because I knew she spoke about something so disturbing, and I didn't know of anyone else in the country who could replace her. And the specific thing that she was saying that was very concerning to me was that children today are not the same as they were 60 years ago. And she backed it up with a lot of statistics, and I felt like, well, this sounds like it should be the front page story every day in every paper that the children today are not the same health-wise. And I felt it was too urgent of a subject, and I called her and asked her if she would please join us again, and she has. The next speaker, there was a movie, Airplane. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was like 40 years ago. And the guy comes out and he says, I have bad news, everyone. And he says, the plane is about to crash. And everyone's like, oh, all right, whatever. And she goes, oh, also, we're out of coffee. Everyone goes, oh my God, everyone screams. In some ways, I feel like our next speaker is that, because all week we had people going, okay, we have climate change, the planet's crashing, and everyone's like, all right. And now Deborah's saying, oh, and there's some concerns about your cell phone. Everyone's like, oh my God, my cell phone. So Deborah Davis Phd Mph is president of the Environmental Health Trust, a nonprofit scientific and policy think tank. Currently visiting professor at the Hebrew University Hadassah Medical School and Andukuz Mayas University Medical School. She was founding director of the Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology of the U.S. National Research Council, NAS, and founding director, Center for Environmental Oncology, University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute. Among the NAS reports she directed were those advising that tobacco smoke should be removed from airplanes and the environments of young children. President Clinton appointed Dr. Davis to the newly established Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board in 1994, and she is a former advisor to the United Nations Development Program, the World Health Organization, and the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health in the Department of Health and Human Services. Her book, When Smoke Ran Like Water, was designated a National Book Award finalist, and her most recent book, Disconnect, selected by Time magazine as a top pick in 2010, received the silver medal from Nautilus Books for Courageous Investigation for the paperback edition in 2013. The Secret History of the War on Cancer was a top pick by Newsweek that influenced national cancer policy by the Cancer Association of South Africa and is being used at major schools of public health, including Harvard, Emory, and Tulane University. Davis has also authored more than 200 publications in books and journals, ranging from The Lancet and Journal of the American Medical Association to Scientific American and the New York Times, and has written blogs in Freakonomics, Huffington Post, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Moms Rising, Oxford University Press, and elsewhere. Honored for her research and public policy work by various national and international groups, the Betty Ford Comprehensive Cancer Center and the American Cancer Society gave her the Breast Cancer Awareness Award. She was commended by the director of the National Cancer Institute for outstanding service, appointed a global environmental advisor to Newsweek magazine, and awarded the Woman of Distinction Award from the Conservative Jewish Women's Organization. The Lemelson Center for Invention and Innovation of the Smithsonian Institution honored her as an innovator on the environment, for which she gave a distinguished lecture in 1998. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations Climate Convention tapped her to serve as a lead author on their assessment of climate mitigation policies 1999 to 2005, and she was a member of a team of scientists awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 with the Honorable Al Gore. Davis was recently featured on the Today Show Pediatrician's New Warning, Limit Children's Exposure to Cell Phones, and on the 9 Jump In Today show in Australia, Smartphone Radiation Concern. Welcome, everybody. Thank you. So let me start by saying that there's a lot of things you could do with your time and your lives. There's a lot of you're smart people, you're passionate. You could do a lot of different things. For you to be writing books on these subjects and speaking about it, you must feel very passionate that there's something very important that maybe the public is not aware of, that you are aware of. So what is the reason that you are doing this, focusing on the subject that you're focusing on? Why do you feel it's so important to devote your life to this when a lot of times it's not even understood by the mainstream? If you want to each answer that.
It's a great question. So I'm touching native bees, and as I'm watching a lot of mistakes occurring out in the world, probably the biggest one I'm going to call it monoculture. Well, there's just 1,000 acres of whatever. Because we have monoculture, it's working against nature. It then forces us to stop the pests from walking through one individual tree, one individual plant. You've got to use pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, sides. The damage that that's doing to the earth, to the soil, to the pollinators, I have that as my challenge. You know, can I take that on? It's a big line of companies that I'm talking about. When I face this, and I've created an industry. We've got a lot of us working together towards getting the right pollinators into the crops so we get more food. What we find is such a big statement, trying to work against the chemag out there. What drives me? In my sphere of influence, do good. That's probably the biggest piece that we're working with researchers. We're finding the right bees, not the honeybee, we'll talk about that later. The right bees in the right crop will give us more food. And by doing this, it's actually going to force the farmers from conventional to organic, because I can promise I will give you more food, but you've got to use my bee. And we think through the power of the wallet, we can get the farmers to shift.
"15 years ago, I had a huge wake-up call. I thought I was leading a healthy lifestyle. I was eating well, exercising, watching my weight. I didn't smoke. I even had a meditation practice. So it came as this huge surprise to discover I had a tumor in my chest. It was this big, the size of a tennis ball. I went to 3 top surgeons. I had it biopsied. It was benign, but it was very, very painful. It was pressing on the nerves that ran down my arm and into my fingers. What I did was I discovered that by making small lifestyle shifts, I was able to eliminate that tumor. And I'm going to talk about it in my talk tomorrow. So it's become my passion to let people know that what goes in us, what goes on us, what we're putting on our skin, all of the chemicals in our everyday products, and what we're exposing ourselves with in our homes, our cleaners, our mattresses, our paint, our carpeting, the electromagnetic fields we're exposed to, all has an impact on our health. And so I'm just very passionate. I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through, which was getting a diagnosis. You think you're going to die, and it's very, very frightening. But the good news is that making small lifestyle shifts, I was able to eliminate the tumor. And so I'm on this mission to educate people about what we're being exposed to unnecessarily in our homes and our workplaces. And in addition, my daughter, who's now 20, when she was 15, became addicted to drugs and alcohol. they wanted to put her, she was suicidal, they wanted to put her on meds, and I stepped in and found alternative ways of treating her. She's now 2.5 years sober. She's doing great. She's in college. She's working on no meds. She's on supplements. And so I have started this radio show called Kids in Crisis, where I interview holistic doctors that offer solutions to children like this, because I meet so many parents who are in crisis about their, and in pain about their children. And I wish I knew then what I knew then, and so I'm trying to help educate people that way. And I speak to pediatricians, I work with them, and like Steve said, children in the past 10, 15 years, the children that the pediatricians are seeing, they have chronic disease. It's unbelievable. And when these holistic doctors make these suggestions on simple lifestyle shifts, like eating organic, non-GMO food, and getting them off food dyes, for example, their behaviors change, and they become normalized, and they don't need the meds. So that's why I do what I do.
So I do what I do basically in that very same vein of having witnessed what Beth just described, which is families whose lives have been turned around because they have awakened to the reality that our way of living is killing us all, actually. Some are just sooner than others. And what's happening in the lifestyle that we're living in the industrial modern world is our children are not developing normally. And what I've seen is the families who wake up to this early enough, they get their kids on the right track, they get themselves on the right track, they make all the lifestyle changes that Beth was just talking about. Those kids turn around and they live fully functioning lives. They do great, they live up to their full potential. Those who do not wake up have a much different story. And so I'm driven every day to try and reach as many families as possible to let them know that there's a different future. The other thing that drives me every single day is this awareness and this sense that we are witnessing the sixth mass extinction, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is that the way we are living on this planet is not sustainable. Our children are the canaries in the coal mine, to use the analogy that Steve mentioned, telling us that the way we are living can go on for no longer because they are sick, because we have more than half of American children today with a diagnosed chronic condition. Half of adults do too, but if you project that forward, the statistics forward, you're not going to have any healthy adults in the United States by the time this cohort of children reaches adulthood. That is insanity. Knowing what we know, and everybody on this panel has been talking about, is that there are little changes that you can make, lifestyle changes, mindset changes that can turn that around. So I feel like if I don't speak about this and let people know about these changes, that I would be irresponsible. I feel it is a moral imperative for us to begin to take responsibility for our lives and the lives of our children.
Well, good evening. I think we all share this moral imperative that you just so eloquently talked about. And I think that what keeps me going, and the reason I'm here and not with my 5 grandchildren or my husband this evening, is because I've got some work to do. And let me tell you briefly what it is, and I'll talk more about it tomorrow. Every single item that my co-panelists have talked about here today is affected by microwave radiation from cell phones. How many of you know that a cell phone is a 2-way microwave radio? How many of you know that, right? And that the phone comes with advice, that it's not a toy and that it should not be kept on the body. Now, we at Environmental Health Trust, the nonprofit that I founded when I was at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute, are working actively about the problem of bees, because as you know, without bees, there's no civilization. Because without bees, there's no pollination, there's no agriculture. We recognize the critical importance of eating well. That's what one of the main things this conference has been about. But let me tell you something, you can eat as well as you want. And if you are addicted to that cell phone and your children can't look you in the eye and they don't learn how to write cursive, and they don't learn how to think about somebody besides themselves and a screen, you and they and all of us are in trouble. Now, the Asian countries, ironically, have started to take technology addiction very seriously. And I was pleased that even last night, with the end of the Olympic opening, there was an acknowledgement that technology addiction has become a global problem. There are over 100 internet addiction camps in Korea now. And China has programs as well, because they recognize, particularly with the one-child policy, that we have created a generation of children that don't know how to relate, don't know how to play well with others or share their toys. And kids come to school today expecting to be entertained without knowing how to learn. And what I can tell you is that all the toxic materials that we're concerned about here, whether in your household products, your cleaning agents, the things we feed our children, the things they're exposed to in their toys, all of them are worsened by the interaction with the cell phone radiation because it weakens membranes. Think about this. One example, and I'll talk about more tomorrow, is that if you have microwave radiation right now, in medicine, it's being used by doctors to treat cancer because it weakens membranes, meaning that every toxic substance you're exposed to can be more deeply taken into the cell of every part of your body. The cells of your body can absorb more toxic chemicals with microwave radiation. So get those phones out of your pockets, put them on airplane mode, and I'll tell you more about it tomorrow in my talk. Now, those of you who are interested, I have a card, this young gentleman here, Giovanni, those of you who promise that you will share this with someone else, we will give you a card that gives you information from the American Academy of Pediatrics that tells you why you should practice safe technology and how to do it. Please raise your hand if you want it in Spanish or English, and he will hand you a card. You have to promise to share it with one other person. And if there's anyone who has more people they can share it with, like an entire group of school teachers, we want to reach school teachers and parents, and I'm happy to talk with you tomorrow because that's what we have to do. We have to educate people and motivate them to understand that this is a tool that we can use constructively, but that right now it's absolutely worsening the quality of our lives.
Okay, I have an ambitious list of questions, so could try for just one 3-minute answer would be ideal, but it's okay if you need to go on. But there are a lot of things I'd like to ask. But I guess we should just start right from the top with one of this question, and I guess it's for you, Deborah. I guess what does the most up-to-date research have to say about the health risks from using a cell phone?
Well, I can tell you that the National Toxicology Program, which is the U.S. gold standard, last year released a preliminary draft of their analysis of the impact of cell phone radiation on the brain and heart and found significant increased rates of rare malignant tumors of the brain and heart in animals exposed in their lifetime to cell phone radiation. Having said that, I can also tell you, as I document in my book, Disconnect, which I believe you have for sale here, that industry has taken the tobacco guidebook about how to create confusion and disinformation, and they have run with it, and they have made the tobacco industry look like amateurs. There's so much doubt in the public mind about cell phone radiation. You see it in the headlines, which I'm going to show you tomorrow, of how this story of the National Toxicology Program has been covered. For example, there is a claim that the National Toxicology Program was not peer-reviewed. That is, to be polite, nonsense. The French have another word, merde. There is the claim that the pathology review, which went through a triple-blinded pathology review, was in fact not blinded. That is also nonsense. But these claims get hyped in the media. And we live in a world where some of us have a president who says there are alternative facts, And unfortunately, in science, we are seeing the suffering and the diminution in belief in scientific research, with a concordant cut in funding for that research, by the way. So the US government is not funding research in this issue. And as a consequence, we will have a delay. The latest science research that's been done outside of the US shows damage to sperm, damage to reproduction, damage to hearing, damage to learning, damage to pregnancy, as well as an increased risk of cancer. Almost all that work, except for the National Toxicology Program, has been done outside of the United States, and we always like to call for more research, because calling for research is a lot easier than actually changing policies, as I think everyone on this table would agree.
Just while we're on it, we're talking about cell phones. What about wireless? You know, if someone's in their house has wireless, is that different? Like, in other words, there's a cell phone to your ear, there's a cell phone on speaker, there's a cell phone on the counter, there's a cell phone in the other room, there's wireless. Like, to what degree are we talking about? What are we saying?
The electromagnetic spectrum goes all the way from the thing that turns on these lights in this room to the thing that's powering this wireless mic right now, to cosmic rays and X-rays. That's all part of the spectrum. Is there anyone in this room who's sensitive to wireless? There are people who are sensitive to wireless, right? They know it, and it's hard for them to spend a lot of time in an environment like this. It is. And for those individuals, wireless, which is what the cell phone is, it can use, or it can be connected through the internet, through your internet provider, can be harmful to them. And there's no question about that. For most people, it's not. It doesn't affect most people that they know of. But there are effects on heartbeat, on tachycardia, on atrial fibrillation, and breast cancer in young women, and a number of other things that we are seeing increase, such as colorectal cancer in younger persons, thyroid cancer, a rare cancer of the cheek called parotid gland malignancy, and a tumor on the hearing nerve called acoustic neuroma. And those are things that we can say with some confidence. Unfortunately, we have human data. Animal data, we have big debates about, but I want to ask you all this question. How come we use animal data to produce drugs and test drugs, and then when we find results in animals from environmental chemicals, we say, well, we better wait for proof of human harm? There's something wrong with this picture. And that's, unfortunately, as I think we would all agree, that's kind of where we are. We say, well, we don't have proof of human effects. Well, yeah, you know, what kind of proof do you want? How many people have to die? How many people have to get sick before we accept that there's evidence? My colleagues and I at Environmental Health Trust represent scientists from around the world working on this. We believe at this point that the evidence is strong enough to justify basic precautionary steps, and that means that wireless radiation, like cell phone radiation, be kept away from the body as far as possible, and that people who are sensitive have the right to live in a world where they can go out and not be fearful of what they're going to feel like.
I'd like to add something, just anecdotally. It's not research, but this is my own observation. So I go into people's homes to help them detox, and so I have these series of meters to measure electromagnetic fields. And I remember one of my clients, a woman had called me in because she wasn't sleeping well at night, and so I kind of fixed the fields in her bedroom. Sometimes we turn the circuit breaker off in the bedroom to kind of lower the fields. But I walked into her husband's office. He had a home office. And she said, you know, he doesn't believe in any of this. It's like, okay. So I go in, and he's sitting next to the Wi-Fi tower. It's literally on a shelf in line with his head. And if I tell you that the field on this thing, it's beyond belief. It was like, you know, 1,000 would be high. This was like 20,000. And I was so alarmed. And I said, you can't sit next to this thing. You know, you need to move away. So he moved away, you know, a few feet, and we were talking everything. He just kind of was like not paying attention. And then I said, how's your health? And he goes, oh, my health is fine. So we leave his office, and his wife pulls me aside and said, his health isn't fine. He just had throat cancer. And it was like, you know, for me, it was such a, you know, a correlation without a doubt. And for him, it was like, you know, it didn't mean anything. And so she said, there's nothing that she can do to convince him, but she just wants to take care of herself, and so some people are just avoidant and in the dark.
Oh, I want to just add one thing to that too, because what I just heard from both of you are the research and the anecdotes that show a clear line between EMF, electromagnetic radiation exposure, and say cancers, like you just described, or other kinds of ways that it impacts the heart. One of the things that has come out more recently is how exposure to Wi-Fi, EMF, electromagnetic radiation can actually slip your body into the sympathetic state when it should be in the parasympathetic state. So it affects the nervous system.
Explain.
And so what that means is in the sympathetic nervous state, that is when you are in kind of your fight or flight, whereas the parasympathetic nervous state is when you actually do your healing. So I'm a believer in the theory of total load on your body. And as Deborah explained before about your membranes becoming more permeable in a state when you have exposure to radiation, it's the same kind of premise that when you are, that makes things more toxic to you. But if you are in a sympathetic state all the time, you never heal. So if you have low-grade inflammation, say from allergy or from toxic exposure or because you're developing heart disease or whatever it is, if you're a child with autism, you are in a chronic state of inflammation all day, every day. You need your body to sleep, to rest, to slip into a parasympathetic state so that your body can heal. If you do not slip into that state, you do not heal. So if you think about living in a house with your Wi-Fi on all the time, you are not able to heal.
May I add just one practical thing? How many of you have cordless phones? How many of you have the base of your cordless phone right next to your bed, the head of your bed? Okay. If you remove it, you will sleep better. Even if you're not aware of sleep disturbances, I promise you. That cordless phone is a mini base station, right? And it should, my advice is that those things belong outside of anybody's home, but if you have one, keep it as far away from where you sleep, from the head of your bed. I'm talking about the base station for the cordless phone, not all the little sets. And in fact, I'll talk tomorrow about how the state of California advised people to get rid of their cordless phones in their offices. And of course now, all of the advice that comes from the government, unfortunately, that used to come from the government at the federal level has been corrupted. That doesn't shock you, I think. But we are seeing positive developments in the state of Maryland, in the state of Massachusetts, and the state of California, finally, on this issue. But the state officials who are experts in this field in Massachusetts, Maryland, and California have had to fight to be able to get their information forward. And fighting, as Beth just said, is what puts your body into a stress response. It's fight or flight. And all your adrenals get going, and you get it in a state of excitation. You need to heal in the dark at night. You need to sleep in the dark, and you can either turn your Wi-Fi router off or make sure it's far away from where you're sleeping. It's really important for your health. And the evidence on bees I will talk about tomorrow, because if it's hurting the bees, it's hurting all of us.
Well, let me just take that question and go to a different question than what I was going to ask. Just let me go right to that question. So what is colony collapse disorder and why should we care?
Just a small piece. I want you to understand that out of the 24,000 species of bees in the world, 7 of them are honeybees, okay? Out of the 4,000 species of bees in North America, none of them make honey, okay? These are native. So we're all kind of focused on the honeybee. Colony collapse disorder is one of a series of maladies that the honeybees are facing, and it's also the varroa mite, and there's nosema, and there's American foul brood. There's probably 97 some maladies that are impacting the honey-making bee. And it's probably the biggest picture, I don't mean to poo-poo a honeybee. It's an awesome honey-making insect. Tomorrow I'll talk that it's actually not a great pollinator. But when man messes with nature, we don't always get it right.
Can I ask
Okay.
you a question about that, what you just said? The honey that we have in America that is being made by our local bees, those bees are imported then, or they're not native to America?
They're a European honeybee.
Okay, they're the European
So we
honeybee.
brought them, the Pilgrims brought them across with the dandelion. They're a sugar, it's a sweet substance. That's why we brought them across here.
But the pollinators are different,
It is not a pollinating bee. It does pollinate.
but it's not the primary pollinator.
It is not the, how it carries its pollination. I don't want to get into this, but how it carries its pollination has us misunderstanding the bee. Okay? Because it's not a great pollinator, we're misusing this insect. And you take, if you look at orchards, you're taking a hive per acre, and these bees are actually a 5 mile radius, 2 to 5 mile radius bee. And when you go out and take an insect and you misuse it, it wants to be about maybe half mile apart. But when you put them a couple hundred feet away, you find that the density, we're now talking 1 billion honeybees all overlapping, you wind up spreading diseases where they shouldn't have been. So it's just pure bee density. We took, I don't know, if we filled this room with maybe 5,000 people could probably fit, and then the 4 of us walked in with the flu for the weekend, you wouldn't want to be there. We are misusing, we think we know what we're doing. We are misusing an awesome honey-making insect and worldwide messing it up. So all of these 90-some symptoms are a result actually of the core cause, we believe, is bee density. Too many bees in one area has all the diseases and viruses and mites all being exchanged in the flower. It's just humans thinking they know
I
what
want
they're
to
doing.
make sure I understand what you're saying. When people drive the trucks around with the beehives,
The
what
honey
you're
beehives.
saying is that is making more density than the bees ought to have naturally, and therefore contributing to the proliferation of disease among them as well?
Yes, and now recent research is showing that when you put a honeybee hive, wherever you're placing it, it's spreading its diseases to the native food-making bees. Okay, we're starving them because they take all the pollen back. I mean, there's so many things that we're doing with the only bee of the world. Unfortunately, we are impacting the food-making bees. And so, yes, all of these hives that are being moved across the country are spreading diseases from the California almond industry to the Georgia peach orchards, but the bees all the way along, wherever these people stop with these bees, we're spreading the diseases that they carried to the native bees. Just is. I mean, I'm working to enlighten people that there are other bees in the world that actually make food. You can raise them, they're gentle. You know, it's a long road towards changing what we know.
Okay. What is different about chronic childhood illness today versus 40 years ago? I made up 40 years. You can pick any time frame, 30, 40, 50. What is different about chronic childhood illness today versus 30, 40, 50 years ago?
I'll take that one. So if you look back into early 1960s, you had a rate of chronic illness in children of less than 10%. So you're looking at maybe you had some asthma. I'm sure you all, growing up maybe knew a child who had asthma or environmental allergies or maybe a type 1 diabetes. Those are the kinds of chronic illnesses that you saw. Fast forward to today, you have 54% of American children with at least one chronic illness. Now that is a diagnosed chronic condition. That's not even tracking the kids who have, chronic constipation, chronic sinus infections, chronic diarrhea, who have behavioral problems that are really have an origin in a body out of balance, but nobody's diagnosing it as such. The kids are just so much sicker today than they ever have been before. We've never seen chronic illnesses in children like this. Chronic illness is something that's supposed to impact older people who've led a life full of various things that might have contributed to that chronic illness. But our children are coming out of the womb sick. They're coming out immunocompromised, essentially. And this is setting them up for, any number of different diagnoses. You're looking at rates, these like discrete epidemics everybody thinks is happening. Everybody thinks there's an obesity epidemic in children because we have 1 in 3 children in America either obese or overweight. Or people think there's an asthma epidemic because you have 1 in 8 kids with asthma. Or an ADHD epidemic because you have 1 in 9 kids with ADHD. And then there's the autism epidemic, which is, when I started looking into this about a decade ago, it was 1 in 150 children diagnosed with autism. Today, the most recent numbers, looking at numbers that came out in 2014 through 2016, put it at 1 in 40. 1 in 40 children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. And the thing that's a little bit tricky about all these epidemics rising concurrently is people only pay attention to the one that impacts them or the one that they're most concerned about, and they're not seeing the forest through the trees here. They're not seeing the big picture, that all of the kids are impacted by something. It just manifests in different symptoms in different kids depending on what their total load is and what their various environmental factors have been that have precipitated that condition in them. The bottom line is, we've never seen anything like this. The future is bleak for this generation of children if we don't intervene. The good news is that the paradigm is shifting because people used to think that chronic diseases were a function of your genes. So if you developed heart disease or cancer or whatever it was that you developed later in life, people assumed it was in your genes. That you have the BRCA1, so therefore you have breast cancer, or you have various propensity to develop chronic illness. Because we're seeing in the kids this early, at startling rates, we know it's something about the way we're living that's making them sick. So that's not the genes. So that's actually great news, right? If we can break out of that genetic determinism that makes us think that if you're sick, you'll always be sick, and start thinking about the possibility that you can get well again, that's enormously powerful and enormously empowering for parents. But parents don't know it yet, because when they go to see their pediatrician, the pediatrician will say, we don't know why they have this, they'll probably always have it, I have a couple medications for you, and that's all I got. So what we need to do is start changing the conversation and start talking about recovery and healing and getting rid of EMFs and the toxins and eating nutrient-dense food and all the things that need to happen to allow a body to heal or to prevent it from getting sick in the first place.
I wanted to add to what Beth just said, that the Environmental Working Group did a study and they discovered that children are born with over 297 chemicals in the cord blood. 297 chemicals. These are chemicals that we're exposed to on a daily basis, that the pregnant moms are exposed to. The air that they're breathing, the food, the pesticides, the plastics, all that. So that's having a huge effect. And so, I always tell moms, if you're thinking about getting pregnant, start cleaning up your diet and your environment early on when you're just thinking about getting pregnant. And one of the 40% of children have food allergies. Right? I mean, that's just shocking. And I know that Jeffrey Smith was here talking about genetically modified food. And when the pediatricians that I work with, when they get the kids off GM foods, their food allergies disappear. So it's just something to consider.
Beth, I was going to ask you, what's your most dramatic example of an intervention that made a change in a child's life? Each of you may have one, and I think people understand it better when they hear. I know your own story with your child yourself, but I'm thinking about others whom you've helped. It helps to sort of bring it all home.
Right. Well, thanks. A great question. One of my favorite was, and it's such a simple thing. So a mom had called me, and her child wasn't sleeping. And the crib was up against a wall, and I measured the fields because not only did the child have, there was a baby monitor, which is a problem. Deborah can talk about that. But there was a huge field coming from the wall up against where the crib was. So I said, what's on the other side of this wall? Well, there was a refrigerator on the wall. So simple solution, we moved the crib to the other side of the room, and guess what? The baby slept really well after that. So, I tell everybody to sort of pay attention to where you're sleeping and what's on the other side of your wall, because if there's a big machine operating, it's it's not good for your nervous system, and you will not relax or heal.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is working or not. I've been documenting recovery stories for almost a decade, and part of the reason for doing that is like following the breadcrumb trail, right? If this is possible for a child with autism or for a child with an autoimmune disease, this is possible for any of us, and we should be learning and studying these anecdotes. So I've got dozens of them. One of my favorite was a woman who called me because I run a nonprofit organization where we try and give parents healing tools, one of which is integrative practitioners that, like you were talking about, that can actually help holistic types of doctors, et cetera, that can help this this kind of situation. And she said that she was being pressured by a rheumatologist at the hospital she was treating her child at for rheumatoid arthritis to put her 18-month-old baby on methotrexate because her baby had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, couldn't walk, was in severe pain, and the doctor said, "I will call Child Protective Services on you if you do not treat," because methotrexate is the standard of care. So, methotrexate is a chemotherapeutic agent. It's a cancer treatment, but it's highly toxic to the body.
And it can cause cancer.
Correct.
As well as treat it.
So this mother stuck to her guns and said, "I'm not putting my baby on that kind of chemotherapeutic agent. What else have you got?" Doctor had nothing else. Mother went to go see a naturopath, a naturopathic clinic that actually specialized in autoimmune diseases, which is what rheumatoid arthritis was. They did a food sensitivity test, which is kind of what you were talking about. Very, very common in children to have undiagnosed food sensitivities, which are not food allergies, but sensitivities which there's no gold standard test for, so most doctors don't even look for them. And this baby, 18-month-old, had sensitivities to nightshades, wheat, dairy, took these things out of this child's diet, and this child's symptoms disappeared. Disappeared. These foods, it's more complex than just the foods causing it. It had to do with sort of some things that were going on in her digestion and things like that. But the point is that that child did not have rheumatoid arthritis anymore because the mother changed the child's diet. That it's not always as simple as that. If you go to the website documentinghope.com, there is a tab that says the children, and there are stories that we've documented of kids who've reversed rheumatoid arthritis, just like that one, autism, ADHD, asthma, depression, MS. We have a child who's 16 years old and almost completely eliminated her MS, chronic Lyme, chronic pain, those kinds of things. You can read those stories there. And I will also give you a book recommendation. One of my favorite books is written by a New York Times journalist. Her name is Susanna Meadows. And she wrote a book just recently called The Other Side of Impossible. She is also another story of a parent who stuck to her guns when her child was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And she found alternative healing solutions, including modifying the diet, getting rid of EMFs, addressing hidden food sensitivities, things like this, detoxifying the home environment. Her child lost his rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis as well. So she wrote a book cataloging all kinds of people who have reversed their chronic conditions by making lifestyle changes. She talks about Terry Walls, who reversed her MS, and a whole bunch of other people. So I highly encourage you to check out that book. It's called The Other Side of Impossible. documentinghope.com, and actually tomorrow I'm doing a talk where I will tell you plenty about, it's a project, it's a prospective research study where we're actually trying to simulate a recovery story in children, or trying to actually do a controlled recovery in a somewhat clinical setting.
Why is there perchlorate, a toxic chemical in rocket fuel, PCBs, mercury, lead, flame retardants, dioxins, and DDT in our bodies? Where did it come from, and should it concern us?
Yeah, as I said earlier, the babies are being born with these chemicals in them because the moms are being exposed. We're all being exposed to these persistent chemicals in our environment. And yes, we should be concerned. And it's important to eat organic food, really important. The good news there is that when they did blood tests on people who were not eating organic, and then they switched out to organic, it only took about 3 days before the pesticides clear from the blood, which is really good news. Some of the other chemicals are more persistent, and so detoxification, like the program at Hippocrates, for example, will help to detoxify your blood that way. But getting off of GM foods, and then using natural products on your skin. Our skin is our largest organ. And so think about the deodorant that you use, the toothpaste, shampoo, conditioner, moisturizer. I mean, every single day. Lipstick, mascara has mercury in it. It's just because it's on the store shelves does not mean it's been tested for safety. So, really take that in. And we need to be our own advocates and choose the most natural products available to us.
I just want to add to that as well. I think that it's important for us to remember that we live in a culture where we are surrounded by things that are toxic to the human body. It's in the air, the water, the food, the lipstick, everything that you put on that's in or around your body that is, quote, new to nature, has the capacity to impact your health. Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who's one of the founders of functional medicine, coined that term new to nature. And I think it's so perfect because it is almost impossible to keep track of the number of chemicals that are out there. And it's like every year there's a new one to worry about. Like in the 70s, it was lead, right? And we were worried about, we found lead in the paint and the gasoline, and we figured out that was a neurotoxin, and then we figured out how to get it out. And then, then it becomes mercury, and then we're worried about cadmium and BPA and BPS, and it goes on and on and on. And it's almost impossible as a normal human being with our pea brains to keep track of all the things that can harm us. I think the important thing to remember in this modern industrial world is that we're just better off using anything that is as close to nature as possible. And anything that is new to nature, you have to just question, is this safe? We don't know, because there isn't the regulation that we would need to keep us safe, to regulate what is put on a shelf, what's available to us in the market. So I think the way to sort through it all is just to stay as close to nature as possible. That's like a few products or a few ingredients on a label if you buy something that's manufactured. It's really about getting back to basics and making things as simple as possible.
Well, I'd like to add something to this discussion. When we were at the National Academy of Sciences, we went through what I learned later I would call whack-a-mole. We'd come up with one bad chemical, DDT, then it would be another one, ESB, then it would be another one, DES, and then this approach that you only need to focus on one chemical is part of the problem. But there was an old cartoon called Pogo, and I think some of you are familiar with, we've met the enemy, and ungrammatically, it's us. We demand a lot of things for ourselves that turn out not to be so safe or so healthy. And just as Michael Pollan has said, you need to, eat less, and if I may modify this, live high in the watershed and eat low on the food chain. We have to think about how we approach the things we put on our body. And as both Beths have said from time to time, our skin is our largest organ. And anything that goes on your skin gets into your body. That people don't generally appreciate that. And coconut oil is one of my favorite products for almost anything. You can eat it, and I tell people with new babies, if you can eat it, you can put it on your baby. And there are other things you can safely use. I mean, cornstarch and things like that are closer to less synthetic materials will be better off. But we're not responsible for the perchlorate that's in our blood and in our urine. That came from rocket fuel that was used to defend this country. And we can't blame the Department of Defense for defending the country, but we need to hold them to a high standard of cleaning up where they have contributed to, potentially, the increased rate of breast cancer on Cape Cod because of the plumes that have been identified, that have not been fully understood to contribute to, but appear to be one of the factors causing the increased rate of breast cancer in that part of the world. The problem we face with chronic illness, as you all know, is that it has many causes. And because of that, we get very easily confused when we come up with one. It's whack-a-mole. It's that. It's lead. It's mercury. Let me just be careful. Lead and mercury are natural products. And they used to be used as, in fact, as food preservatives. Mercury and arsenic were food preservatives in the 17th and 18th century. So they're natural, and they're not always, we would all agree they're not the things we want to be able to use. But I think the larger argument is that we as consumers, it's something that Beth, I think we were on a discussion of this maybe years ago. Bella Abzug once said we need girl cots. Do you remember that one? Boycott means say no, right? Girl cot means the fact is women are responsible for purchasing most of the things that bring into their households. 75 cents of every dollar is women are in charge. So we have to start demanding the right to buy healthier products, safer products, products that are not bee toxic. I think we need to get a list from you of what practices and what people are doing. I'd like to know more about how we can promote healthier bee, because that's it's a new one to me, and I'd like to know how to do it.
One of the papers that I wish I could have found, or could find again, about 3 years ago, was between German and English researchers. That they were analyzing whatever pesticide was out there, and they were taking the active ingredients, 3%, 7%, and all the rest were the inactives. And the study actually started with, we know this article will get buried, but read it while you can. And I just didn't save it. So they went out and took the active ingredients of whatever pesticide, and they had 5 human genome lines that they were analyzing it against, and it was safe to feed your kid. But then they started adding in the half-life extenders and the penetrators and the accelerators and the compound. These were all the inactive ingredients, but these are all secret. They're not active because the company's able to say that. But they found that once you started putting these compounds together, it was lethal to like 4 of the 5 human genome lines. So the message that we are being told is it's safe for bees because we're using this one piece as the active ingredients, not being told about the inactives. And so as we're even now understanding, as I'm working with the ARS, Agricultural Research Sciences Services, when these farmers are out there putting, I'm trying to save money, I'm putting sprays into my fields. As they're putting the sprays out there, it says do this, but you're adding now adjuvants. So you're adding 3 or 4 other chemicals, because while you're spraying it, let's put them all out there. The chemicals are changing in the tank. And so what was maybe once safe is now no longer safe. And so it's...
Your adjuvants can be things like kerosene. Some of your adjuvants can be really xylene, can be really nasty, volatile organic compounds.
By themselves are maybe fine, but when you're mixing these chemicals together, they don't stay isolated in a tank. And so when we look at this, you could probably say all of your pharma and whoever you want, your chemags, they can all pretty much say, it's not my fault. Okay? But when you start adding the thousands of things together, and you're the fibers in my clothing, coupled with my underarm deodorant, all these things, it's the longer compound. No one can research it, so you can't blame me. I get it. Doesn't make it right, but it is.
There's something known as the body burden, and so it's like all these chemicals add up and add up and add up, and then it starts to compromise our liver, which helps to filter everything. Our livers get backed up, our lymph gets backed up. That's the problem. So you want to just choose, as Beth was saying, as close to nature as possible. And I dedicated my book to my grandmother because I know she used baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, vinegar. These things work. They worked back then, they still work. I use baking soda as a deodorant. It works like a charm. I put it in a salt shaker and I sprinkle it and I put it under my armpits and I'm good for the day. Secret, I grew up with that stuff, and it's just when you read the label, it is shocking. It's really shocking. Even some of the natural deodorants, the number one in the stick deodorants, in the natural Tom's deodorant, it was propylene glycol, which is found in antifreeze. And you're putting that on your skin, right near your breast. It's so simple solutions, and they're out there. And we're lucky because more and more great products out there, natural, healthy products, are being offered to us. So that's the good news.
So, assuming that there has been a significant amount of studies on the effects of pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, cell phone radiation, when this is presented to the authorities, whoever they are, the USDA, the FDA, the EPA, I'm not sure who is in charge of it, why, if this is clear information, isn't the government and the governmental agencies properly stopping this or regulating this?
My 2 cents is your lobbyists out there. I mean, I didn't find it on whatever page of the Farm Bill that went out there, but you cannot sue Bayer. It's in our law. Right. Okay. I mean, so money speaks. Pharma, ChemAg. You can't sue these places because they have the lobbyists and they can do what they want.
In the case of the telecom industry, it wouldn't matter if you sued them anyhow. It's a multi-trillion-dollar global business, and they are self-insured. And the reason they're self-insured, as I will tell you tomorrow, is because Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re, who write insurance policies for big businesses, right? They insured the asbestos industry. They took a big hit. They refused to cover health damages from wireless radiation for almost 20 years. 20 years ago, they first identified cell phone and wireless radiation, EMF, as a risk that was too risky for them to cover. But this industry is so big, it doesn't matter. They're going to get hit eventually with the brain cancers that they have caused, and there are lawsuits going through the courts now that they're fighting tooth and nail because they've got lots of very expensive lawyers, and we have not such, legal, we don't have, we're outnumbered and outgunned. But truth is on our side, and as my grandmother used to say, when you have nothing left to stand on, you can always stand on the truth. But you're absolutely right. It's the legal system which is stacked against us. So, Steve, the response to your question is that the laws are written by the same companies that they're intended to protect. And in fact, Harvard University Center for Ethics of the Law School issued a report in 2015 that called the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, a captured agency. That's what they called it, a captured agency. Because right now, the head of the FCC was formerly an executive with Verizon, and previously the head of the FCC worked for the cell phone industry for 10 years. That's what we're dealing with. And for this administration, I don't think I need to tell you, with a cabinet of billionaires, you've got the industry, the foxes in charge of the chicken coop.
Yeah, even as simple, you'll find most of the worldwide bee labs are funny. They've all been bought out by large corporations, and you can't study pesticides on bees in, I think, 8 of the 9 labs in the world.
Cannot.
Yeah. I don't quote me on exactly the right numbers, but it's funny. You're just not able to study those, and I get it. Okay, this is all rays of dismal. Where's the good news?
I got good news.
Okay, good. Because I think we can change this. And I think this is my word that I use. A while ago, organic was awesome. We keep on using the word organic. It's whitewashed or greenwashed out. And the next came along sustainability. I was listening to a panel with General Mills and Syngenta, and they were all using the word sustainability out there. I finally had to pull out my iPhone in my pocket, and had to look up the word sustainability because it was no longer the right word. Mm-hmm. And so messaging, they keep on changing the words so you feel good. I use the word earth true, so earth true practices. I don't think you can damage that word. Well, we'll see. But that's what we're trying to do is to get as low as possible and use those types of.
I think the good news is for everybody that's here, congratulations, you showed up. And for all the people on this panel, everybody here, you guys are doing a great job. And I thank you, Steve, for bringing us together. Thank you. And the good news is that more and more people are fed up and they're not going to take it anymore. And the more of you, that's why you had to raise your hand and say you promised to give that card to somebody. And we are looking for you to give it the information and share it to more and more people. Because people are standing up, they are showing up, they are going to the schools. you guys have done, I know each of you from the work you've done, you've worked with schools, you've worked with parent organizations, you're creating models of what can be done. And so that's where the good news is, because we are changing people's lives. Unfortunately, it's a slow process, and that's why we need you. We need every single person in this room to reach out to 10 other people and say, listen, I learned that you can actually do something if you have an autistic child or a child with rheumatoid arthritis or diabetes, and not just make them feel guilty because the children are heavy. You know, one reason they're heavy is because when they were in their mother's wombs, they were exposed to what we call obesogens. Those are chemicals that are endocrine disruptors that have the ability to make a child get fat easily when they get to be in adolescence. And they have the ability to make the pregnant mom gain weight more easily and not be able to lose it. So a lot of the problem that we have with obesity is chemically induced. You still have to exercise and try to eat well, but no matter how well you eat, some people are not going to be able to lose the fat so easily because of what we've done with our food supply. And why we're here tonight and why we're spending the time to talk to one another is the good news. Because we are going to make a difference, and each one of you can go out and talk to other people and say, hey, you know, that arthritis you have, there may be a way for you to reduce it. And it's, by the way, it's good to eat well, but you also have to clean up the environment in which you live and sleep and work. And we all have to clean up the big environment together.
So there's a lot of people in this audience and online who agree with you. But what they're really saying is tomorrow is Sunday, they're going to wake up, and they've got to answer a bunch of questions. So I'm going to ask you 15 points. You might want to give you a pen, so you could write this down, or I'll remind you. But these, I want to get your thoughts on these. You can skip any that you don't have feedback on. But this is the question. For everyone who tomorrow and Sunday wakes up at 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock, they are going to they're going to have to make a decision on a bunch of things. So I just wanted, quick thoughts on what you have to say about these things. Number one, should they get their hair dyed? In other words, there's women, they're 30, they're 40, they're 50, they have gray hairs, they have to make a decision on hair dye. Number two, a lot of women like to put makeup on. They have to make a decision. They go out socially, and everyone is putting on lipstick and makeup, and they want to know if they should, they want to fit in. Number three, the gardener comes around and says, your lawn's going to die if you don't put chemicals on it. I got to put the chemicals on. Assume it's, May. Number four, they want to clean the kitchen. They have to have cleaning supplies. They want to clean the kitchen. They don't want it to smell. They don't want it to be dirty. And then they also have toilets they have to clean, and they definitely feel like they need something strong in there. Number five, the cell phone's ringing. They want to know if they should, pick it up and put it to their head. They've got to know what to do. Number six, they're leaving for the day, so they want to put the cell phone on in the pocket in case their kids call. Number seven, there's people in the house, and everyone wants to use the wireless, so they have the wireless on in the house. Number eight, it's time to get the flu shot, and and they have a new baby and they have to make decisions on vaccines. Number 10, they got to get a carpet. They want to know if they're concerned about carpet. They need carpet in their house, but someone told them that there's chemicals in the carpet. Then they want to paint the inside of their house, but someone said to paint out gases. Then they have they don't feel good. The doctor says take an antibiotic. Then they need more furniture in the house, but couches are made with all kinds of foams that could outgas. Then the teenage son says, I want the wireless headbuds because that's all the kids have. I don't want to have wired headphones. I want the wireless headbuds. They're fine. They work on Bluetooth. They're fine. Then they go to cook breakfast, and they have pots and pans. And, I don't know what's in the pot and pan, what it's made of. And let's start there.
Can I knock a couple out? I'm going to do the lowest hanging fruit. Sure. And then you guys can take the tough stuff. So I think if you are somebody who wants to color your hair or wear cosmetics, my favorite thing out there is madesafe.org. Madesafe.org. And this is an organization that was started by a woman named Amy Ziff, which is verifying that the ingredients in your cosmetics, your hair dye, your shampoo, your soaps, etc., are made safe, meaning they're not just like kind of okay, they are edible, that you can put them on your skin and not have any adverse effects. And it's a really rigorous, comprehensive scientific testing program. So I understand that we live in the world that we live in. This is part of our culture to dye our hair and wear makeup and do all the things that Steve just listed. That's our life. I get it. Like I sometimes when people hear me talk about getting as close to nature as possible, it's like everybody pictures going and living in the woods in a hut somewhere and being naked, but that isn't gonna work. We have to be in this world, but not be of it. So I think there are shortcuts, like finding things like madesafe.org for some of your household personal care products that can help you make better choices that are closer to sort of the natural, safer things. So I took the easy one. You guys?
In addition,
Beth, you want to take the cleaning?
sure. In addition, there's the Environmental Working Group. So they have a website called Skin Deep, right, .org. And so you can plug in your shampoo, your conditioner, your sunscreen, your makeup, and see how toxic it is on a scale. You know, it goes green to red. So, so that would be easy. And also they have them for household cleaners as well. But easy thing to do, yes, household cleaners use either the stuff that you find at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, or you could go to the all-natural hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, white vinegar. I have recipes in my book for all that, cleaning your oven, and
Her recipes work. Okay,
Yeah.
and it's really, sometimes it takes a little more work. Like, for example, you can clean almost any baking pan that's got grease on it with baking soda, but sometimes you have to let it sit overnight.
Yeah.
But then in the morning, you just scrub it, and it really does work. And you really can use toothpaste to clean your silver.
Yes.
And there's a number of things that Beth has been recommending for a long time that actually work.
that's true. And
I mean,
I'm-
all
wait,
the ones I've
what was
tried.
the- I'm gonna
We had makeup, lawn,
the lawn.
lawn. Yeah, you go ahead and do the lawn.
Okay, this is, in my yard, there are aphids, okay? And it's funny, if I take away all my aphids, all my ladybugs don't have anything to eat, okay? So we keep on taking our mentality of the kitchen cleanliness, and you walk outside, and, oh my gosh, there's a hole in that leaf. Where's my spray? Because I can't have holes in my leaves. We take that perfection, but we don't understand that in nature, it's a eat and get eaten environment. The plants are there as habitat, they're there as food. The things that eat the plants are eaten by birds. You know, the birds are eaten by something else. It's this huge, big ecological environment that doesn't need product on it. It actually works itself out, okay? So the artificial green, you know, is probably not the real right thing to be putting on your lawn. Small little aside, I raise bees across the country, and when I put a couple hundred of my bees out, I maybe get 400 or 500 every year. A couple hundred out, 400 or 500 back. One year, two places, New York and around me in Seattle, both places got, instead of 400 back, got like 10 or 15 back. Well, they both put down some lawn care. You know, it used to be called Chem Lawn. Nowadays it's called True Green. And all the bees, they didn't die. They just flew someplace else. There's your canary, but the canary went up the shaft instead of dying. It left. So my tiny little statement is, let your yard be its yard. And if it dies, it shouldn't be there in the first place. Okay? I'm not putting cactuses up in Washington, and you're certainly not growing moss down in Arizona. You know, let nature do its thing.
The city of Toronto passed an ordinance opposing all ornamental pesticides quite some time ago. And I was there in Ontario, actually, they passed it for the province. And you get wonderful dandelions, and you can eat dandelion greens, and they're actually very good for you. They're full of a lot of folate and rich vitamins and fiber. So the idea of limiting ornamental pesticides is one that really ought to take root, no pun intended, with respect to that one. But Beth, what's your best recipe for cleaning the kitchen toilet?
Baking soda and vinegar, and I don't remember the proportions to it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about pots and pans, because the what is it?
Teflon.
There you go. It
Teflon.
has the coating.
Perfluorinated compounds.
Yes, PFOA it contains. Now DuPont, when I wrote my book, DuPont was talking about changing the formula. They said they were going to change it by 2015. That hasn't happened. So non-stick, that's what the word I was looking for. Choose another way of cooking. You know, I figured out a way to not make my eggs stick with using coconut oil. Just heat it up to a certain degree, and then things don't stick. So you don't really need that Teflon coating. So just be aware of that.
One of the problems that we have to acknowledge, though, is that a lot of our solutions cost money. Like there's a Le Creuset nonstick pan that works great and doesn't, use the perfluorinated compounds that are very toxic, but it costs $200. And that's part of the problem, is that you have to be able to afford to be healthy. And what I want to live in a society where you don't have to be rich to be healthy, where it's the normal thing, where it should be usual not to have pesticides that your children will roll around with on the lawn, where your dog is going to get cancer if you use lawn pesticides, which, by the way, we do know that. You asked Steve about the cell phone and carrying the phone and Wi-Fi, so let me try to answer all of those. I'm not going to tell you not to use your cell phone. I am going to tell you to use it less. I am going to tell you that children should not have cell phones, that it's not a toy, and that schools should not be using them for so-called educational purposes, because it really defeats the purpose of education if children start to learn at a young age that everything they need to know is in a screen, because it's not. They need to know how to live in the natural world. They need to know how to look you in the eye. They need to know how to find out information. They need to know how to play with other people and understand their feelings. And feelings are not communicated with a screen. We live in a world where some children have difficulty confusing their parents with an iPhone. There's a funny story, you can look up iMama, and it's a story about a child that actually would see a phone and say, "Mama, Mama," because at age 9 months to 18 months, the mama was traveling so much, whenever this baby saw a phone, they would call it Mama, which is a kind of sad commentary on the nature of how the young brain can get so captivated by these things. We know about dopamine. We know that sugar, drugs, cocaine, rock and roll, and cell phone radiation all light up the pleasure center of the brain called for dopamine. They all do. And we need to control how our children use these devices so that they don't become so addicted to them, as many of us are, that they don't learn how to learn properly. So carry your phone on airplane mode, or how many of you know that you should never carry it next to your body? You do now, and you're going to know more by tomorrow. So please do come to my session at 11, and I'll be happy to share more information and more resources with you. With respect to Wi-Fi, in your home, go wired. It's not that hard. Information on how to go wired can be found on our website. We are constantly updating that. There's ways to wire everything that you think you have to have wirelessly. And we have to have a conversation as a society. Last time I looked, which was 2 years ago, about 90% of the use of the internet was taken up by 10 to 20% of people. And it was dominantly used for movies, games, and pornography. That was about 90% of the internet. Movies, games, and pornography. Now really, the argument is being made that we have so many people with so many devices that we have to increase the capacity, and now we need to put up 5G, which I'll talk about tomorrow, which basically puts a refrigerator-sized, large multiplex antenna, which can have 1,000 of the antennas in a box the size of a small refrigerator, 30 feet above, right smack in front of your bedroom window, and you can say nothing about where it's located, how much power it has. Now, the good news is that it doesn't go very far, but the bad news is that it might be right at your bedroom window. And there's a proposal now in the city of Santa Rosa, people are upset about it, to put these up every 200 or so yards with no ability to say no to it. And I think that that's why we need more people to be informed about this issue, because it's outrageous. It's outrageous to think that we're going to take a technology that has never been shown to be safe, assume it's safe, and expose people to it, and then wait for the data to emerge. So I think precautions and you going wired is important so that we reduce the demand that we have now for this growing demand for Wi-Fi. As to carpeting, I think you both have written about this as well. New carpet can contain a lot of nasty things. So bare wood floors are nice. If you need to have carpeting, go with more natural materials. They last long, they can be cleaned more easily. For paint, low VOC paints are now widely available. For antibiotics, I don't know if anyone else here addresses that, but you can get a lot of antibiotic action out of things like grapefruit seed extract and oil of oregano, two of the most potent antibacterial, antiviral agents ever known. Oil of oregano and grapefruit seed extract. They have been demonstrated in laboratories to kill lots of bad stuff, both viruses, fungi, as well as bacteria. And they are used in primitive cultures as antibiotics. You're clapping for, yes, the natural antibiotics. And naturopaths will tell you how to use these. They don't taste great. So for little children, you have to put it in something that is sweeter for them, and you can sweeten with stevia. And the capsules, if you can swallow capsules, that's fine. But I'm thinking for children, it's kind of hard. Wireless headbuds, give me a break. Do you really think that because your child wants to have a microwave device inside their brain, you're going to have to give in to that?
What if it's Bluetooth?
Bluetooth is better than not. And I'll tell you, it's okay for short periods of time. But the new ones, which are intended to be worn all the time, first of all, they're going to be lost. They cost a fortune. You know, everybody loses things like that. I cannot recommend it. None of my expert advisors recommend it. And we're very concerned about what it might mean over the long term. And it's one step from that to implanting these things in our bodies. And there are people who are ready to do it. Put it in their tooth, for example. You can do it. You can do this, all right? Should you do this? No.
Any other comments on any of those, or? While we're on it, what about just sitting in front of a computer or sitting in front of a TV? Does that have any issue with radiation or anything?
Well, sitting, as you know, is the problem, right? Sitting has been identified as a contributing factor for many diseases, many of the ones that we talk about. The answer is it depends. It depends entirely on what you're being exposed to. And I don't have enough information. By the way, Steve, I don't really think it should be my job to know whether it's safe or not. You know, I really think that is where the government and the private sector have got to do a better job. They ought to be able to issue information. You ought to be able to find out how much radiation comes out of your phone under normal use. And guess what? I'm going to show you tomorrow something shocking. The French government actually has a whole agency that does nothing but test phones. And they test radiation. And guess what they do? They actually test it on the body. Guess what? All our American phones and all of the world's 6 billion phones are tested in a phony system, just like the flaw that we had in the diesel engine exhaust testing. You know that one? Where the diesel engine was programmed to emit less fuel toxic agents when it was hooked up to a computer? That scandal was called Dieselgate in Europe, okay? That scandal we now have in France called PhoneGate, because what they showed is when phones are tested the way they're used next to the body, they emit between 2 to 10 times more radiation than the current limits allow. 2 to 10 times more. I'm going to show you the data tomorrow. And because of that, we are living in a world where we have phones tested in the United States. You don't all know this because why would you bother to know? They're tested in a holster. When was the last time you saw anybody under 70 not using a holster for their phone? All right? That's how they're tested. They're tested with a test that uses 30-year-old science and is 20 years old. They're not tested for children. They're not tested for babies. They're not tested for pregnant women. They're never tested for their effect on bees, by the way. And the whole test system is a scandal. It is an outrage. And if more people understood that, which is why you're going to come to my talk tomorrow, more people would take action to say, look, tell me, don't make me have to go, as I will show you, 6 steps into my phone to find out how safe it is to use it, and test the phones the way they're used. That's what we need.
I have a question for you, Deborah. I read that in China that they are now requiring pregnant women to wear EMF shields in front of their laptops and computers. And then I also read that in France they were removing Wi-Fi from the schools. Can you speak to either?
Both of those things are true, and thank you for raising them. But it's been, for a long time, I think more than 10 years, Asian women, not just China, but in other Asian countries, at the moment they know they're pregnant, and because they used to monitor pregnancy for all working women, because they controlled it, wear a smock. And by the way, if you go to the Sears website, yes, that's Sears, the company, S-E-A-R-S, you can find a pregnancy smock. And there's a website, I think, called Belly Armor, and they sell protective clothing as well. And their biggest sales are in Asia, where it's standard practice for a pregnant woman to have a smock. Now, I can't tell you if those smocks really work, but I think that because they have metal in the fabric, they're going to protect immediately, but I don't know what it means if you, for example, had a smock on and you're holding a 2-year-old. I'm not sure that's a great thing, because the radiation is going to come off of you and maybe go back out to the toddler. But that's certainly true. Also, there's a company called Huawei, H-U-A-W-E-I, in China, and they made something called a baby-safe router, And that router was called Baby Safe and created a huge uproar in the industry. What did it mean? It meant the router automatically went to sleep when it wasn't being used and woke up only when it needed to be used and used the lowest power possible. Now, all of our routers should be baby safe. We don't need routers to be on 24/7, and now you have to turn it off if you want it off. But that's ridiculous. You ought to be able to get them down and turn them off, and frankly, you ought to go wired, which is not that hard. You can get your router, which comes from your cable into your house, and there is an Ethernet connection on it, and you plug your Ethernet connection in, and most of the router boxes have at least 4 of them, and then you can get an Ethernet hub, which will give you another 4, and you can connect with wires, and yes, it does mean wires, but it's a lot safer, and guess what else? It's faster, and guess what else? It's more secure. Camilla Reese's organization just issued a huge report on why we should have corded landlines around the country, and yet we are embarked on a policy led by the FCC to get rid of all landlines. We won't be able to get a corded landline. That's going to be a huge national emergency when the next hurricane hits and the next power goes out and we have no ability to communicate because we built the whole system to rely on wireless and it won't work.
I just wanted to add about the laptop. When I measure, I notice that if the Bluetooth is on, the fields are much higher. So if you don't need your Bluetooth on the computer, turn it off, and then the fields will drop. And try not to put the laptop on your lap. I mean, it's just not a good thing. I mean, I'm sensitive to it. I can feel the buzzing. So
it's called a tablet because it belongs on a table.
Okay.
It's called a tablet because it belongs on a table, and it's tested, most of them are tested at 20 centimeters, that's 8 inches, from an adult male body. A big, tall, heavy guy, 28 inches away. So think about all these little children sitting with their iPads over their reproductive organs. It's terrible. It's a form of child abuse. And people don't know. They don't know. So that's why you all now have a job to do, to save the children and your grandchildren. There's no question in the audience.
We'll do that later. No questions right now, please.
I just want to add something to what you said about hardwiring. Be aware that many of the cable companies, if you are going to hardwire your house, that many cable companies are now shipping modems that have a 2.4 gigahertz network and a 5 gigahertz network. And the 5 gigahertz network is meant to be a public hotspot. So the goal is for them all to connect so that you can walk anywhere with your phone or your tablet or whatever and never be out of Wi-Fi range, because every home in America has a public hotspot. You don't even know about it because they don't tell you. They just send you the new. The hotspot basically means that anybody walking by your house or your apartment or whatever can hook to your internet, to your Wi-Fi network. It's meant to be public, and yours is meant to be private. Yours is a 2.4, but it's 5 gigahertz. So it's got a much stronger signal. So even if you hardwire, like Deborah mentioned, she's right, it's very easy to do, you still have to call the company and say, shut off my 2.4 and 5 gigahertz networks, please, because they have a public one installed automatically. This is not every cable company, but it's one of these things that they roll out and they don't tell you about. So you just have to be aware for that.
So I guess, the issue is, I know what's going to happen for all these people. They're going to go home. They're going to say, I went to a great conference, was really interested. And they're going to tell someone about it, pretty excited. And the people are going to say to them, yeah, I believe everything in moderation. The truth is somewhere in the middle. And that's an extreme position. It's hard. I don't want to make life that complicated. Show me the study. And they're basically going to make it that it's a very extreme position to worry about chemicals or radiation or cell phones. And you start saying to yourself, well, I guess maybe I am being neurotic, because everyone has their cell phones on, and no one's thinking about chemicals. So the question we have to all decide is, what is balance? Because everyone's telling us that the middle is so far away from what you're saying. So what you're saying is a balance, they would consider extreme. What they're saying, the balance is to use the cell phone an hour a day instead of an hour and a half, or 2 hours instead of. So the question is, when it comes to chemicals and it comes to cell phones, how extreme should we be? Because we don't have the support. Everyone is telling us that we are totally extreme, and we're not sure if we are or not. So how extreme do you be when it comes to chemicals and cell phones, knowing that we live in a world where everything is chemicals and cell phones?
I would say that look around. We're all sick. Everybody it's just one person after another. There's cancer in everyone's family. There's chronic illness. It's extraordinary. If we were all feeling well, then maybe no big deal. But we're not. We're not, and our children are suffering, and it's out of hand right now. And I think we're in a crisis, and we really need to pay attention if we don't want to go down that road. I mean, how many more friends of mine are going to be suffering with breast cancer and mystery illnesses? And I'm a zealot, if you will, but I see that making these choices, it's not that hard. It's really not. I mean, it's just educating, and once you know, you can't go back. I think once you realize, like what Deborah's talking about, if you know the research, then why would you want to expose yourself to it? It seems almost insane to do that.
Sometimes it's not that easy. For example, Zika. Quick run, there's mosquitoes in the area, so I don't want Zika, I don't want my daughter to have Zika when she's pregnant. It's a big deal. So let's go aerial spraying for mosquitoes all through the southeast, and they knocked off, I tracked the word bee just to kind of keep myself current. And oh my gosh, 50 hives in North Carolina. This lady lost all of her hives because the, could have been a crop duster, could have been, I think it was actually a truck just spraying, knocked off her honeybees. Okay, and I feel sorry for her honeybees. Nothing else was flying after they finished. No ladybugs, no dragonflies, no nothing. We knocked off so much because we're afraid of, well, I don't want to get Zika either. So where's the trade-off? I don't want something, so I'm going to kill everything around me. It's not easy. Point.
That's true. However, there are other ways to deal with Zika. And one of the most important that you have to realize is that when you're faced with something like that and you're pregnant, you practice the precautions that you know about and to avoid exposure to mosquitoes, which means that you do not go out in the dark when mosquitoes are feasting and ready to bite, that you wear clothing that is long and covered, and that you're very vigilant about your exposure. You don't go into areas where there's a Zika infestation, and you do have to get rid of the vectors, the standing water. For example, in Miami, which is where they had an actual mini epidemic that they quenched in the United States. That epidemic was quenched not by spraying, but by getting rid of standing water, which we know is a challenge, but it can be done. And even in poor African countries, bed netting, sleeping with bed nets and things like that can be very valuable and cost effective. But that is, I'll grant you, an outlier. And I'm not opposed to chemicals. When you have to choose between equine encephalitis, which can kill half the people who get it, which is a mosquito-borne disease, or not, you may have to spray some things at some time. I grant you that. But there's no question that we are overusing and misusing a lot of toxic chemicals now. You don't really need to have the perfect lawn, as you know very well, and you certainly don't want to compromise your health and that of your dog, which does happen if you have the perfect green lawn. And there are growing numbers of green golf courses now that are being managed with biological predators and what's called integrative pest management. And integrative pest management has come leaps and bounds over what it used to be. So we want to encourage integrative pest management for mosquitoes, which means using fish and introducing more birds and more predators of the mosquitoes to control it in that particular instance. But I think the other issue we have to acknowledge is that we live in a complex modern society, and we are all responsible for choices that we make where we control those choices. But there are certain things that we can't control, and that we have to do a better job of informing the public, to educate people, which I think everyone on this panel is trying to do. We educate people to motivate them, not to make them feel bad, but to make them feel good, to make them feel empowered, because knowledge is power. And if you know more, you can do more. And not to throw up your hands in paranoia and think, I'm just being neurotic, there's nothing I can do here. There's a lot you can do here. You can start with, if I may say, reading their books, and also mine, about what you can do, because we have a concept called practice safe technology. That doesn't mean no technology. I'm not telling you to go back to the Luddite dark era, but be safe and be sensible about what you're doing. And we think people will do that if they have information, because knowledge is a form of power, and we want to empower you to know more about how to be safer for yourselves and your family.
I just want to respond to your question about how to not feel like the person with the tinfoil hat. And that is all too common of a response that once you start living a lifestyle that is, about healthy eating and, hardwiring your house and reducing toxins, you begin to feel like that crazy person and an outlier. And what I will say is that all that is happening here, all we're talking about, is counterculture. And, you think about it, what is making us so sick is our culture. It really is. So we are part of a counterculture, and countercultures sometimes emerge to become the dominant culture. So if you just think of this as like a social movement, and what's really important in counterculture and social movements and movements for change is community. So you got to find your people. You got to find your tribe members. You go to conferences like this, you meet your peeps, you get together in your community, you start talking about this stuff. You're confident when you talk about how, oh yeah, I use baking soda. You're confident. This is what you do, and pretty soon, if you're in your community, you're around other people that are doing the same things, it slowly, over time, becomes the norm. And I think we have to embrace these changes, be proud of them. A lot of people who are doing the B work and talk about the people who are doing the B work, because no one knows that's going on or that's important. And so I think the more we talk about it and the more we lift each other up who are doing this kind of good work, the sooner this counterculture will become the dominant culture.
bats dying, pollinators dying, lawn chemicals, pharmaceutical drugs in our water, antibiotic drugs, chemicals, wireless radiation, kids getting autism and chronic disease, medical and telecommunications industry having control over government. If you right now became completely powerful head of the country with total control and authority, what would be the 5 to 10, or 5 is fine, specific laws that you would enact as the head with full authority that would have the most impact? What are your 5 specific, not philosophy, the specific laws that you would put in place right away?
Because we're making America great again, right? Good.
No, I actually, as some of you know, I was a presidential appointee. And I want to say, for having served in a government and been approved by the Senate, it's not easy. I mean, we can make fun of officials and everything, and some of them are really perfect for Saturday Night Live. There's no question about it. But it's really not easy to govern. We have a big, complicated country with lots of people. Having said that, with all due respect, I don't think we necessarily need a single new law. I really don't. I think we need to implement the ones we have. We have the right to know. It's absolutely embedded in the Constitution. A democracy depends on an informed public that freely consents to be governed and elects people to represent the people because they consent to be governed because they are informed. So at the very core of our democracy is the right to know. We are being denied that right to know because the government is not doing the testing on the chemicals, is not screening things before they're introduced. It's treating us like subjects in an experiment with no controls, whether it's chemicals or wireless radiation. So I don't think we need new laws. I think what we need is to use the ones we have already. We have, as you know, pesticide laws. I helped to write the toxic chemical law that is, you know, not very effective right now, but it could be effective if it were ever used effectively. And so it's not a question that we need new laws. We need new implementers of the laws. We need people who respect our rights as American citizens in a great democracy. And yes, the greatest democracy the world has ever known. We really do. And if we had that, I think that we would be much better off than talking about specific laws that we should organize to have, because I think we have adequate laws. We just need to use the ones we've got, and we need to use our rights as American citizens to know, to be informed, and to be involved in decisions. So for example, for 5G, there's a law being proposed right now that you all need to write to your senators and congressmen about to allow 5G antennas to be put anywhere the companies want, and you can't say anything at all about where they're located, and localities are not going to be able to get even the normal fees for where the antennas go. So that is why Governor Jerry Brown vetoed that bill when it came before him a few months ago in California. The bill was to say that municipalities would get a small amount of money for the 5G antennas, and they could not object at all to where they were located. And this got the city of San Jose and Sacramento as a city, and San Francisco, and I think LA, to object to the law because they were being cut out of any decision making. But the law may come back yet again, and at the federal level, it is now pending. There are several variations of this law, a new law that will allow telecom companies to put these antennas wherever they want. They estimate that in California there would be 50,000 new antennas in the cities alone. And every 200 to 300 yards there would be a 30-foot high tower with an antenna that could be the size of a small refrigerator. And by the way, they're calling them, like George Orwell, small cells. There's nothing small about these cells. They're higher frequency, so they don't go as far, but they are, you will need thousands and thousands more than we have now. Every city. So that's an example of a law that we ought to organize against, but I don't think we need new laws, and I'd love to hear if you have a different view.
I'd like to see more transparency in our products. So right now, the word fragrance on a label can mean up to 100 different synthetic chemicals, and it's a trade secret, and so manufacturers don't have to reveal what's in their products. So, and there's something called the precautionary principle in the European Union that says that the manufacturer has to prove it's safe before going to market. Here in America, that's not true. We put things into market, and then if people get sick, then they have a recall. It just doesn't make sense to me to do it that way. It seems backwards.
I get so frustrated with corporations and messaging, and when you look at the word organic or these other places, they're so manipulated. Today, if I'm an organic company, or actually I'm an organic orchard, and I go out to whatever 3 websites I want to go find whatever product, and they don't carry it, then I can now still keep my label organic and put straight pesticides out there. It is in law. I tried 3 times, and I tried 3 times. I'm still organic. So, not fair. No. So I don't know where to, if I were to enact a law, if I could, truth in words. Gosh, how to greenwashing, yeah, because I don't have an answer, but the right to know and using words that can't be, we're all inundated with too much stuff. I can't be the experts on electromagnetic. You guys can't be experts on bees. I'm not experts on earthworms. I have to rely upon the experts around me to give me good knowledge. And so I can't know. And so I've got to have some outside independent place that is unbelievably neutral, giving me advice. And maybe your websites that you're talking about are the right ones.
Could you clarify that? Did you? I buy organic produce. Is my organic produce organic?
They are telling you that it's organic. Yes, they are telling you that it's organic. So it's up to the farmer and their ethics to follow those lines or not.
But if they 3 times can't find it, they can put regular chemicals.
That's like in the Oregon law. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of places out there that if you dig deep, I tried to be as good as I tried. I couldn't solve it.
But I'm saying when I go to Whole Foods
Yeah.
and I buy strawberries that say organic, you're saying is it possible that
Absolutely.
those? Are you sure?
Yes. I wouldn't say across the full country. I think it's Oregon. That it is. They've tried their best, but the word organic is a greenwashed word. It has been absolutely compromised.
But what about if it's certified, USDA certified organic? I'm assuming that's
I hope so. That's
at least 95% organic.
So I only know what I've read, so I can't cover the whole country, but I have enough doubt in my mind that it's not as it once was thought to be. I don't have the proof there.
Okay. What is going on in the United States with sperm quality and fertility? Are we reproducing as well as we used to, or is there a difference? And if there is a difference in sperm quality, what is the cause of it, and what is the logical conclusion of what's going to happen over the next 25 years?
I've published on this in the Journal of the American Medical Association and other places. First of all, the average male today has almost half the sperm that his grandfather had. Half that the grandfather had. And we know that from studies of military recruits. Those are men that come into the military that have been monitored. We get a sample of sperm. And so a colleague of mine once said that men today are half the men of their grandfather's age. But that's not a joke. It's not a joke at all. The website of the Cleveland Clinic on infertility advises that men who want to father healthy children get their phones out of their pocket. That's the website of the Cleveland Clinic. That is hardly left-wing fringe neurotic ideas, Steve. Okay, the Cleveland Clinic and all major fertility clinics around the world today have similar advice. And it's very interesting to me that when I was, my book came out in India, and as well as, I guess, a dozen other countries. It was the Indian infertility experts who first identified the problem of hip, thin Indian guys with 2 or 3 phones at their hips or on their pockets with lowered sperm count. And they did studies where they took sperm from healthy men and put them in 2 different test tubes. And the test tube that got exposed to cell phone radiation, those sperm died 3 times faster, with 3 times more damage on the mitochondria of their DNA, which is the engine of the cell. This is very strong evidence that cell phone radiation can damage sperm. Now, other things damage sperm, including the pesticide DBCP. And men who were working with this pesticide for production of bananas and pineapples in Costa Rica and Ecuador were found to be sterile. And I wrote about this in my Smoke Ran Like Water book and also in The Secret History of the War on Cancer. I don't know if you have either of those books here. I don't think you do. But in those books, I wrote about this problem in a chapter called Save the Males. Because the males are endangered and they are exposed to solvents, and the so-called inert ingredients in pesticides can be much more toxic to sperm than the active ingredient, just as you said. And so we have a lot of evidence about what is causing the decline in male fertility. And a lot of the experts in this have identified pesticides and solvents and heavy metals, as well as cell phone radiation. And that is why you find advice about avoiding those exposures to men who want to father healthy children. There's no question about it. There's also been, by the way, a decline in the birth of boys. The sex ratio at birth was 1.05 male to female. We don't understand exactly why, but it's historically believed to reflect a number of genetic properties of the X and Y chromosome. You know, women are XX, right? And men are XY, right? So the Y chromosome, if you'll hold this for a minute for me, the Y chromosome is missing a leg to stand on. And it may actually be weaker than the X chromosome that has 2 legs to stand on, right? There actually is some evidence for this in genetics. And what we know is that all over the world in industrial countries, there's been a decline in the birth of baby boys relative to baby girls at birth. We don't know why fewer boys are being born. But this has been happening in all industrial countries for some time. It's certainly not cell phones only, but it certainly is one of the factors.
I have to tag on something you said when you said save the males. I kind of get a lump in my throat because I have a particular concern about boys, and that is that boys are afflicted with neurobehavioral and neurodevelopmental disorders at a much greater rate than girls. And right now, as I mentioned earlier, we have 1 in 40 children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. That number is estimated to be about a ratio of 4 boys to every 1 girl diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. There are estimates, if you take the rates of growth of autism diagnoses over the last few decades and you project those growth rates forward, there are estimates that we will have 1 in 4 children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder by 2033. So if you think about the ratio of boys to girls, 4 to 1, for every 4 kids that get autism, 1 will be a girl, the rest will be boys. So by 2033, if we have 1 in 4 children with autism, how many boys won't have autism? That's the kind of thing that runs chills down my spine when I think about it. And the other thing, going back to your question about sperm and for infertility, I actually think that the chronic illness epidemic in our children begins at infertility. Infertility is the red flag. It's telling us that either the mom or the dad or both of them, their bodies don't want to reproduce. But what do? We do IVF, and we have all these amazing technologies to help our bodies reproduce when our bodies are not able to. And that, there's all kinds of research looking at the consequences of many of the fertility treatments, the drugs, the IVF, these things that we do to try and support fertility in bodies that are not able to safely reproduce. So there is a real concern there, and Save the Males is such a great title because it is such a deep concern of mine. As a parent of a boy, as a parent of daughters, I just worry for how it's going to shape up a couple of decades down the road.
By the way, Deborah, do you feel that your fellow panelists are being a little extreme and exaggerating these points at all, or do you feel like they're completely accurate with the information?
I think on the autism story, it's even worse in the Black community. the rate is higher for young black baby boys, as you know. And it is a real serious problem. I really don't, Steve. I think that, you guys are doing a good job of highlighting things that are seldom talked about. This makes us all uncomfortable. It makes us all very uncomfortable. The society can be judged by how well it treats those who are unable to take care of themselves, how well it treats children and the elderly. And we're not doing a very good job, because we have, on the other end of the spectrum, we have increased rates of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And more importantly, the thing I find very troubling, we have an earlier age of diagnosis of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, an earlier age of diagnosis. And that's also signaling that something's going on with our environment and our genes. And one of the things that we know from research I'll show tomorrow is that if you keep a phone next to your brain for 50 minutes, you change the amount of glucose in the part of the brain that's most exposed. That's another article from the Journal of the American Medical Association, done by the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse with a brilliant study design. They put a helmet on somebody, on several people, and they did a PET scan, and they had phones on both sides, and the person wearing the phones did not know if the phone was turned on. It was simply turned on. It wasn't playing music, it wasn't doing anything. And the signal being on next to the brain, what does it do? Well, it's smart. So 900 times a minute, it goes to the tower. Where are you? Here I am. It's a handshake, electromagnetic handshake. Where are you? Here I am. And because it's close, half of the radiation from the phone gets into the brain. And it gets in, just about 2 inches to the adult brain, and by the way, almost through the brain of a baby. Okay? And after 50 minutes, they did a PET scan, and they showed a significant increase in glucose in the brain. Well, guess what Alzheimer's has been called? Diabetes of the brain. Because there's too much glucose in the brain. And that's where you hear about, and of course there are things like grains that contribute, the brain grain, et cetera. But the fact is, I think that this is another one of the avoidable causes, and this is another end of for the elderly that we have to be aware of. And this may also, there are reports, I don't know if you have any on yours, of people with dementia that has been stabilized or reversed with certain interventions. Do you have any of that in your website yet? I think I'll try to connect you with some people who've done that work. Some of them come out of functional medicine, like a neurologist in Florida.
Dr. Dale Bredesen's doing
Yes,
research.
that book is incredible. Well, actually, do you know about it? You could tell them a little bit about that work.
Yeah, actually I met Dr. Bredesen a few years ago, and I was telling him about my tumor, and he said, what you did was you changed your epigenetics by making lifestyle shifts, and that's what he's doing with Alzheimer's, that he is putting people on pure food and water and taking out all the toxins, and he's finding a tremendous reversal of Alzheimer's, where people, they're shocked because current knowledge seems to be, it's irreversible, but he's seeing that it is reversible by making lifestyle shifts. Dale Bredesen, Bredesen.
Doesn't he also advocate a slightly modified paleo diet?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, when I looked at it, it's a diet that has no artificial sugars, no added sugars except for stevia, and I think xylitol. But it's very, very much, like you say, pure food, but a little bit heavy toward the paleo side, not just vegan, which I know doesn't fly with some of the ideas that you may have here, Steve. But in fact, they had shown extraordinary outcomes of people who were unable to walk on their own and couldn't find their car keys and couldn't function, restored to functionality. So it's an extraordinary series of stories. I think it'll be, the other end you might want to add to.
Right. His book is on the New York Times bestseller now. I think it's called The End of Alzheimer's is the name of it.
So before I ask my next question, I just want to say that these issues are very, very disturbing, very real. The 5G, everything you're saying. There's a local magazine called Creations Magazine, and Neil and Andrea, they're over there. When you guys stand up for a second, it would be good if you guys wrote about this. It would be good if you followed up on all of these subjects and included it in your magazine for future issues. These are urgent issues, and we don't have a way except for email to reach the local audience, and this reaches the local audience. So if you could connect with these speakers and try to follow up and let the rest of Long Island know, because you have connection with them about these issues. These are urgent issues, and it would be great if you could continue this conversation. We'll do it with videos, but if you could get this stuff into the magazine, that would be really great. I want to ask you about a number of things. You can comment on any of these or none of them, whatever you want, but again, just to pick out what you want to comment on. So 1, hair dryers. 2, vaccines. 3, the antibiotics that we're giving beef and chicken. 4, sunscreens. 5, monarch butterflies, why are they dying? 6, the benefits of each of us growing our own food. And 7, turning off all the electricity at night in the bedroom. So I'll say those again. 1 is hair dryers, 2 is vaccines, 3 is antibiotics in beef and chicken and turkey and pork, 4 is sunscreens, 5 is monarch butterflies and why are they dying, 6 is the benefits of each of us growing our own food, and 7 is turning off all the electricity in the bedroom. If there's any or all of those that you want to comment, I'd like to get some thoughts on those topics.
I'd like to talk about the antibiotics. Pigs, chickens, cows, they're dosed with high doses of not only antibiotics but growth hormones, and we are what our animals eat, and so it's getting into us. And one other thing are the fish farms. I know there's a big problem with overfishing, so they're creating these fish farms, but they're also giving because they're in such close quarters, they're giving the fish antibiotics as well. And they're also, like these salmon farms, they're giving them food that the flesh of the salmon would be gray unless they put in artificial orange food dye. And so they have a color wheel, these fish farmers, and they'll pick the color orange that they want their fish to eat, because we as consumers don't want to buy gray salmon. It's insane. The thing about it is that artificial food dyes are banned in Europe because they cause emotional problems with children, and so here in America they're fed. They're allowed, and so that is a big problem too. So yeah, the antibiotics, when we're eating food that contains antibiotics, we become antibiotic resistant. So if we do need an antibiotic down the road for some reason, we'll become resistant. It won't work as well on us, and it just gets stronger and stronger, the need to keep upping the antibiotics. So yeah, organic, again, sustainable, non-GMO, you'll avoid the antibiotics.
I'll hit the sunscreen topic because it's one of my favorites. And I think dermatologists probably hate me for opening my mouth about this subject, but I think when we think about sunscreen, we have to think about the concept of adaptation, and we have to think about the fact that before the modern era, all of us lived outside with daily sun exposure. First thing in the morning, you got up, you looked outside, you looked at the sun, not directly, but you saw the sun got on your eyes, it got on your skin, you were outside most of the day. Sun was a part of your daily life. You were adapted to having that sun on you all the time. Fast forward to the modern world, most of us spend our days indoors in air conditioning and artificial light. We don't see the sun very often. So what happens when you go outside for your vacation and you've been inside the whole year? You get sunburned because you have not adapted to that sun exposure. So we have this, and yes, too much sun, like in that kind of instance, can cause cancer. It's like any other kind of radiation. However, What we need to do is start understanding the health-giving properties of natural light, of sunlight, and the fact that we actually need it to have and sustain good health. And there's myriad reasons. Everybody knows about vitamin D and about how you have to have the sun exposed to your skin to produce vitamin D, which is important for immune function. That's pretty well known. But what scientists are beginning to realize now is that the sun, and seeing the sun first thing in the morning on your eyeballs without sunglasses on, is actually really important for regulating your circadian rhythms and all kinds of biorhythms in your body, right down to like digestion and things like that. The sun is also important for actually helping you produce energy on a cellular level. There's research now showing that the sun exposure may play a role in helping your mitochondria to produce energy. Okay, so we are in the modern world living without sun exposure just by living indoors so much. But then we have this paranoia and fear of getting sun on our skin because we're afraid of skin cancer. So we put sunscreens on. That there's two problems. One, you're blocking your sun exposure. And two, a lot of the sunscreens have toxins in them. So that's when you would go back to the database that Beth recommended, which is ewg.org, has a skin deep database where you can tell which sunscreens are more or less toxic. So the toxicity issue is one thing. But I'm an advocate for getting sun on your skin every day if possible. When you're in the Northeast, it's really hard. But being smart, and being smart means if you've been indoors all year and you go to Florida for a week's vacation, you can't go out in the sun and just expose your skin like that because it's maladaptation. Your skin is not adapted to seeing the sun like that. So that's what I have to say about sunscreen.
I just wanted to add, I have a recipe for natural sunscreen. It's ascorbic acid powder and water mixed together. You could add a little glycerin. And it's not... it doesn't sit on top, but it actually absorbs into the skin, so you need to put it on about 20 minutes before you go out. But we used to go to Hawaii with my fair-skinned daughter, and she never got burned. So,
and as you know, that's also a good thing for aging skin, because you're basically, vitamin C is good for other properties of the skin, building collagen and whatnot. But I will say, as someone who spends a lot of time in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, at high altitudes where you cannot avoid damaging sun rays, though I don't disagree with anything either of you has said, that zinc oxide is one of the most effective blocks. And if you really need to be concerned about, as you do when you're 2 miles high in altitude, blocking the sun, the best thing is long sleeve shirts and pants, not exposing your skin, and using zinc oxide and blocking it, especially if you're fair, when you have to be in that circumstance. And many of the sunscreens, as EWG's website, the Skin Deep website shows, many of the sunscreens contain a lot of toxic ingredients. You want to be careful. I think there's another way you can make it with coconut oil and certain of the essential oils, lavender, but some people may be sensitive to that as well. So there's a bunch of recipes for natural sunscreens that you can try out. Has anyone heard of the efficacy of a capsule that you take that they use in Australia to prevent sunburn? I've heard that there was such a thing. I don't know. But to answer, say again? Lycopene. Oh, well that's, yeah, I know, but there's something else lycopene can be useful as well. But there's something else in I've forgotten the name of it. Maybe I'll check with my friend from Australia who may be awake when I finish here. The other questions you asked, hair dryers. Old-fashioned hair dryers are really bad sources of high electromagnetic fields. The best hair dryer is air. But if you can't do that because you want a certain type of style, right, then if you can get a hair dryer where the motor is in the wall, so you're not having your high exposure in your hand, that's the best thing to do, because it does give you high exposure. Steve, would you remind me, you had a few other questions as well.
Vaccines, the monarch butterfly dying out or being extinct, and why does that matter? The benefits of each house growing their own food,
All right.
turning off all your electricity.
All right, well, obviously, sleep in the dark, eat your vegetables is really important. It really is. And sleep in the dark is important, for, as Beth has said, because you reset your clock when you wake up and you have light. That's what we are programmed to do. If you sleep with blue light interferes with the production of melatonin. Melatonin is a natural hormone that you all make when you close your eyes and go to sleep at night. And it's interfered with if you have any flickering electric lights in your bedroom. So get rid of anything that is flickering. And if you had trouble sleeping, certainly you can think of getting a kill switch, for your bedroom, which is something you've advocated for years. Or you can make sure to unplug whatever it is that's, you can put it all on a power strip and just turn it off. That's also a solution for nighttime sleep. The vaccine story is complicated, okay? There's no question that we overdo vaccines, particularly for young children. No question about it. There have been, lots has been written about this, and there's a CDC study that was suppressed showing that for African American baby boys, there was an increase in autism in those that had been recently vaccinated at young ages. So what I told my daughter with my youngest grandchildren was there's certain vaccines that children should have, that they should have them spaced out as far as possible, and that you have to be very careful not to overload their immune system at a young age. Now, there are different points of view on this, but the reality is that at this point, prudent use of vaccines is what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends, and what I'm comfortable recommending as well, although I know they've been overdone and people have become sick because of it. And never ever take a child for a vaccination if the child has a cold or isn't feeling well. Never.
I can touch on two things. The monarch butterfly and the honeybee. So there's only one bee in the world, and there's only one butterfly in the world. We tend to generalize. The monarch itself is, representative of a lot of butterflies, and its problem really comes down to it migrates from the north to Mexico and back up, and really we're just interrupting those pollination pathways where there's supposed to be food all the way along, and we're just interrupting it with agriculture and depletion of pollen sources. We are throwing chemicals out there, and it's just it is what it is.
Well, there's one other possibility for the butterfly, and that is the cryptochrome. Cryptochrome has been identified, the CRY gene has been identified in the eye of the monarch butterfly and most migrating insects and animals. And the cryptochrome is that allows the animal to detect both light and color, crypto, and chrome for color, but it is thought to be critical to detecting the Earth's magnetic field. And they've been elegant research on this where they took birds, the dove, and they put goggles on them. And the birds were able to find their way blinded by goggles. So they concluded that there was something else besides sight that was working. And they said, and then they identified this cryptochrome. And I've actually been doing some work on it right now because it turns out that humans have a cryptochrome. And they've done some incredible work where they've taken the human cryptochrome and put it into a knockout fly and shown that they can do all kinds of interesting things. They can take the cryptochrome out of an insect and then it gets lost, the fruit fly, which is, gets totally lost, and then they put it back in and it can find its way like the best of them.
Are we saying, how are we knocking this off of the monarch?
I don't know how we're knocking it out of the monarch, but I'll tell you one thing I think that interferes with it.
Electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we need to figure that one out really soon.
And on the food part, a while ago, I think 2014, maybe they said 42 million backyards had food growing of some nature. That's awesome. And I think it might just be a strawberry plant or it could be just a tomato.
Right.
My want is, I believe, communities need to be a little stronger. I'm touching an organization called American in Bloom, and one of their shifts from having just a lot of blooms in a community is thinking through edible landscapes. Mm-hmm. And so go through, we have a couple places in Seattle where you, as the general public, are allowed to walk on there and pull an apple off a tree because it's the community's apple. And so to change communities into more food-based communities, so your right-of-ways, your little medians between your sidewalk and the street, grow food for the public. And it's just an idea that I think makes more community sense, as well as health sense. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, I'd like to take any questions from the audience. That woman over there in the black, if we can give her a microphone, hold on. Sorry, we're going to steal a mic, if you could share. Where? The woman right there.
Hi, I want to ask you about fluoride vitamins. We talked about vaccines. How do you feel about the vitamins the pediatricians are prescribing for infants, and also the fluoride in the drinking water? What is the stand on that? I'm 100% anti. I'm a dental hygienist. I promote treatments in the office. According to the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry and the American Dental Association, they both promote it, and it's acceptable standard by all associations, but I just feel there's just too much research on it, and I think that it's just overload, overkill. And working in pediatrics, I see the disease so frequently because they have so many adverse reactions, and as soon as they stop taking the fluoride vitamins, which I just kind of on the side say, you know, just give it a shot, stop taking it, see if there's a difference in the digestion, in the behavior, in things like that, and sure enough, there is. It just amazes me. It's like my own study. But I just wanted to know what the feeling is and what your position is on that.
My dad's a dentist, so I've had this conversation ad nauseum, actually. Fluoride's a neurotoxin. It just is. Does it help protect the enamel of the teeth? Yep, it sure does. Is it a public initiative that was undertaken that was successful in helping to prevent decay? Yes, absolutely it did, but it's not without consequence. So my feeling on fluoride, and fluoride, by the way, is also one of those compounds that is synergistically more toxic in the presence of other things. So like aluminum and fluoride together are synergistically much more toxic together. So I think dental decay is intimately related to diet and nutrition. And so if we're looking at ways to stop dental decay, we have to start with nutrition. I mean, the Weston A. Price Foundation has been advocating that for decades, saying that, you know, we're barking up the wrong tree with dental decay and with using fluoride but it's the same kind of approach that we use with pharmaceuticals, right? Which is, you know, what's the cheapest, easiest, quickest way that's the least painful for people to have to fix this one problem, but it creates other problems downstream. So I'm not an advocate of fluoride, don't use it myself, but I believe nutrition is the way to prevent dental decay.
Yeah, let's get the sugar out of baby food. There's a lot of it. It's hidden, in, you know, and you can make your own. But if you're a busy person and you can't make your own, there shouldn't be no sugar in baby food. It's not needed, and it should be against the law to give an infant, which I've seen, soda to drink in bottles, you know, in a baby bottle, to give them soda to drink. People should understand that sodas are just poison, really, because they have as much sugar as they can have without turning solid. That's how they decide how sweet to make them, how much sugar they can take. I totally agree with Beth. It does prevent decay, and it is a neurotoxin, and therefore I do not recommend it be added unless you have a child, which you may have, that has a very poor teeth because of genetic underlying issues, poor malabsorption of minerals. In that case, you can topically apply and make but in the dental office, as opposed to giving them vitamins, which I think are almost never warranted. Yeah, no, I understand, but let's go on to another question. I think we are in agreement about that danger.
Want to get the lady in the back there?
Not sure if you're aware, but right here in Huntington, we have 160 small cells that were placed throughout just that town. There's more in Centerport, Northport, town of Oyster Bay, and I know there's some in Garden City in people's backyards. I have one right outside, 70 feet from where my children sleep. What could we do?
We have a website, ehtrust.org, and it has resources on it that have been used by communities to stop this. In Santa Rosa right now, there is an active effort underway to block the proliferation of these. I think we need to try to work with the senators. We really do. We need to get this before Gillibrand and Schumer. I think this is going to become a public health emergency, because what we know about 5G, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, which I'm happy to share with you, is that 5G accelerates bacterial and viral growth. It accelerates the growth of cancer cells. I mean, come on. We don't need anything that's going to be accelerating cancer growth in our general environment. We also know that it penetrates the skin. They say, oh, it's just a 64th of an inch. Yeah, but guess what? It resonates with the sweat ducts, just like antenna. And by the way, the same frequency that's in 5G is being used by the Department of Defense now for weapons that I think I'll show the video tomorrow, that make people feel, when you expose them to 5G at a high power, that their skin is on fire. Okay? I'm sorry to hear that this has happened here, and I don't know what else to offer you but the information with which you should go to your authorities and say, look, this is not a good thing. And in the case of your son, and if it's his bedroom, there are some shielding techniques that you can do that will help. E-H Trust. That's E as in Edward, H as in Harry, T as in Tom, trust.org. Look up 5G on that website, and I'll be happy to talk with you tomorrow at my talk at 11 o'clock, where I am going to focus on this issue at the very end.
In the very back, the blue hat. Right there.
Could you please repeat the website about the different sickness that the kids are having today that we could look up?
There's two websites I'd refer you to. One is epidemicanswers.org, and that's epidemic like the plague, epidemicanswers.org, and also documentinghope.com. And on both of those sites, you will see some recovery stories. They're different recovery stories, but you'll see a variety of different chronic illnesses that kids have recovered from on there.
Okay, the guy over there all the way at the end.
Thank you for a great conference. It's my first day getting here, but I read the website, and it's very scary. I mean, there's so many things. When you were talking about the sunlight, the first thing that I thought of was the chemtrails. And what is that doing to our sun exposure? And, you know, there's the idea that there's so many of these organizations, you know, pancreatic cancer, we got to find a cure. If we looked at what's the cause, it would seem like then you wouldn't get it in the first place. And just one of the things that just seems so ironic, you know, the woman said about all of these cell towers, but, you know, we had a Navy plume, and the Navy is supposed to be protecting us, and yet there's so many chemicals that this is supposedly leaching out, and for 30, 40 years is happening. I mean, there's so many things I could talk about, but on Long Island, they said that there are some serious chemicals, medications that are going through filtration systems that are not really being filtered. A woman was on Long Island Business Report saying something like a dioxin 1,4, and it's even in Tide. The clothes that you're washing is now becoming toxic. It just seems like there's 100 things I could probably ask you guys about, but you know, ironically, you say the Navy or whatever the military is using this as a weapon, but yet the military is causing so much toxicity, nuclear weapons. All these things that are supposed to keep us safe are actually, ironically, like a George Orwell nightmare. This is actually what's killing us. So I don't know. I mean, when you say about the water supply, chemtrails, is this part of depopulation? Do they want to make people sick? You know, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it seems like there is a power that wants people sick so they can't think about voting or you know, like even Sunday, how many people are watching the Super Bowl and they're being inundated with the worst chemical foods of Doritos, of all these things?
Okay.
I'm
Let,
sure
let,
that,
let them respond. Let them respond.
You know, you're right, there's a world of things that we're living in, but all you can do is get informed about the things you can control, right? And right now, you can control what goes in your mouth. You can control the things you put on your body, what you use to clean in your home, and how you're exposed to and how you use technology. And we are here talking about things you can control. When it comes to bees, what are we supposed to do? I want to ask you, what are we supposed to do?
The answer for bees is I need you guys raising native bees. Listen to me tomorrow. I think I'm at 9 o'clock.
What does that mean?
Raising native bees. There's, out of the 4,000 species of bees in the U.S., a quarter of them nest in holes. Reeds, got wood trays, holes in trees, but nest in holes. I can pick these bees up from your yard and move them over to my neighbor's yard. Okay? These bees are going to be giving us far more food, but I've got to get the bees of Tennessee found, raised, in enough quantities that I can move them into organic farms. Same thing of Ohio bees. So these bees out there, and this is, I'll talk about tomorrow, but physical.
Bee nest? Is there a
No, so this is the misunderstanding. Out of the 24,000 species of bees, got that, okay? 95%, maybe 96, are solitary. Every female is a queen. They're very gentle.
They don't live in hives.
They don't live in hives. They live holes in the ground, but every independent, they just live for 6 weeks, go in the ground or go into holes, and they lay an egg, or gather a little pollen, lay an egg, and seal that little chamber, one egg at a time. And they maybe have 20 eggs in their body, and they're done. All those bees all come out at about the same time. Some bees are coming out in March, some bees come out in August. And so out of all these thousands of species, I need you guys learning about whole nesting bees. It is the future of our food supply. The honeybee is something it's a nice little insect that raises honey, but it's not a great pollinator. We'll chat about that tomorrow. What Beth just answered, what you said about counterculture, that's actually right. That's the right words, and it's the right attitude, and it's these people here that are going to be making the difference. They've heard about it, and it's spread the word.
Yeah, I'd like to make one comment. If you are watching this conference live or on live stream or on replay, you got to come to terms with one simple thing, whether you planned it or not. You are being called to be far more active than you might have wanted to. You might not have wanted this job, but you're obviously a tuned-in, conscious enough person, and you are the nose cone of the rocket. And there's hundreds of people, and you might have said, I just came to this conference, I know I didn't even want, I'm sorry. You are being asked and enlisted to play such a bigger role than you might have planned, and maybe you deep inside always understood that you were capable of this, but for everyone who wants to go home tonight and sleep and say, Deborah's got it handled, she is screaming at the top of her lungs. They're all screaming. They did the best they could. They wrote books. They're doing everything they can. They're giving it to you. I organized a conference. This is all I got. I made it free. There's nothing left. We are now counting on anyone who hears this message to be in their power fully, completely assume that you are smart, you're capable, you can do it, and lead in a way that is bigger than you had ever planned, because obviously if you're here, you're supposed to be here, you're supposed to play a big role. So that's my thought.
Steve, we use a word called prosumer versus consumer. Consumers just spend, a prosumer knows where their dollar is going, and you are voting with your dollar. So just think through being a prosumer.
Hi, good evening. You made a comment about a woman who protested or went against what the doctor said, and she was successful. In my experience, in my observation, it seems that she could have had her child taken away. Does your organization protect against that? No. Okay.
No, I just want to say that that does happen all the time, and you'll hear things about medical kidnapping. One of the things that concerns me on that topic is there are children, many children today, who have really complex medical conditions that look a little bit like autism, a little bit like mitochondrial disease. They're sort of eluding, they can't really diagnose them. And a lot of those parents are being accused of Munchausen's by proxy, which, if those of you who know it, it's this psychiatric kind of diagnosis that's given to mothers who make up diseases or conditions to get attention. It's very rare. Munchausen's by proxy rarely happens, but it's becoming an increasing label or accusation for mothers who always trust the mother's gut. The mother's gut knows better than anything else. And those mothers are trying to get help for their children because they know their kids are sick, but just because they don't fit in a diagnostic category or they don't have a specific drug for their child, they just get bounced from hospital to hospital, doctor to doctor, and that's when it becomes a problem. So that story I told you, that mother was lucky. She was, because she could have gotten in trouble there.
And I want to add something to that. Please, any of you who have an illness or some problem you don't know about, check out where your router's located. Change what you're doing with your cell phone right now, and you may find that that alone will create a much big improvement in whatever health issue you're dealing with. Whether it's insomnia or migraines or rash or unexplained belly aches, check out where the exposures are to the router and to the phone, and don't let anybody fall asleep with an iPad on their body, ever. They're microwave radiation going right into their body. It's a very bad thing to do. So please do. That's one of the things to check. And the others, of course, are the exposures that the Beths have been talking about that we have to be more vigilant about. And absolutely, I know of many mothers that have saved their children's lives because they went back and argued with the doctor and said, look, there is a problem. We've got to do something about it.
I have a story of a mother just like that. Her child developed tics, and he was diagnosed with pandas, which I had never heard of before. And then it turned out she luckily had this amazing doctor who took the time, because so many doctors, will take just a few minutes, but he took the time and he felt the boy's neck and he said, oh, you have swollen glands. And they discovered that the child had a root canal, which I didn't even know that they do for a 3-year-old child, root canal. He had a massive infection, and when they pulled the tooth and fixed it, he's completely normal now. He's no tics, no tummy problems, and she knew something was wrong, and she just kept persisting and persisting until she found an answer.
If I may ask another question.
Yes.
I'm anxious too, because I have also observed there's a kind of an evil pull with cell phones with the teens and the young kids. And if you try to take it away, there is a very negative reaction. Oh, yeah. You said that there was intervention in another country. Do we have something here? Because it's a definite syndrome.
Thank you for asking the question. I think that's an excellent point to make. There are, as far as I know, a few psychiatrists that are recognizing this as the addiction that it is and working to create interventions. The younger in age a child starts with this, the worse it is. But just like any addiction, it starts with the 12 steps. I have a problem, and it takes a family intervention to get there. And family policies, the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending as a policy, no cell phones at dinner, take them away at night. No, even from the teens, take them away at night. No internet after a certain time for everybody, including the parents. That's a little challenging for some people. And if you have to use it as an alarm clock, put it out in the hallway. They make enough noise, it wakes up anybody. And really start to disconnect. The title of my book is Disconnect, and there are ways to do it. But there are a few doctors that are doing this now. They're treating this as a family syndrome, clinical psychologists and psychiatrists. And we have some information on this on our website as well. But you're not alone. You are not alone. And there's a growing recognition. I'll show you tomorrow, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates did not let their kids have these devices when they were children. They did not. And they made billions of dollars out of getting everybody else to do it, but their children weren't allowed. That tells you something, right?